The winter came down on the camp like a verdict. Snow didn't fall so much as it settled, quiet, heavy, final, over the barbed wire, the watchtowers, the hunched barracks that crouched in the frozen mud like beaten dogs. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, the Ardennes forest stood black and unmoving. Trees stripped bare, their branches clawing at a slate-colored sky. December 1944, Germany, Stalag 9B, private first class. Daniel Mercer pulled his coat tighter, though it did nothing. The cold had teeth here. It gnawed through wool, through skin, through bone. It lived inside you once it got in, made a home there. He exhaled and watched the breath cloud in front of his face, then vanish like everything else did in this place. "Inspection!" someone shouted in German. A whistle followed, sharp and mean. Men stirred, barely. The POWs shuffled out of the barracks, boots wrapped in rags, faces hollowed by hunger and months of captivity. Americans, mostly. Infantry from the 28th Division, paratroopers from the 101st caught in the chaos of the bulge, a handful of pilots whose planes had burned out of the sky. Mixed among them were British Tommies and a few Canadians, all thrown together by the machinery of war. Daniel stood in line, shoulders squared out of habit more than pride. He'd been a clerk before the war. Newark, New Jersey, a job behind a desk, a fiancée named Ruth, who smelled like lilacs and wrote letters that arrived weeks late and felt like they belonged to another life. He hadn't fired his rifle in anger until November. He hadn't surrendered until 3 days after that. Now he waited, like the rest of them. At the far end of the line stood Captain Edward Eddie Hale, Royal Army Medical Corps. British, mid-30s, tall, lean, with wire-rimmed glasses and a mustache that somehow survived despite everything. He wore a medic's armband so frayed it looked like it might fall apart if you breathed on it. Wrong. Hale moved slowly along the line, checking men as best he could. Frostbitten toes, infected cuts, ribs broken by rifle butts. He wasn't supposed to be there for inspection. The Germans didn't like medics getting too close, didn't like witnesses. But Hale insisted every time in calm, clipped English that made the guards roll their eyes. Sometimes they let him, sometimes they didn't. This morning, they did. "Jesus! Hale, you're going to get yourself shot," Sergeant Tom Alvarez muttered under his breath as the medic passed. Alvarez was from San Antonio, a former high school football coach with hands like shovels. His left eye was swollen shut from a beating he'd taken for stealing potato peels out of the kitchen trash. Hale gave him a thin smile. "Wouldn't do the lads much good if I stayed warm in the barracks, would it?" Daniel watched Hale stop in front of a kid. Couldn't have been more than 19, whose hands were blue, fingers stiff as carved wood. Hale took the boy's wrist gently, felt for a pulse, frowned. He murmured something too low to hear. The German officer overseeing the inspection, Oberleutnant Weiss, paced along the line with a clipboard. He was neat in a way that felt obscene. Pressed uniform, polished boots, scarf tucked just so. He stopped now and then, barked an order, shoved a man forward or back. The guards laughed when someone stumbled. Then Hale froze. It wasn't dramatic. No gasp, no sudden movement, just a stillness that rippled outward, subtle but unmistakable. Daniel saw it from 3 men down, the way Hale's shoulders locked, the way his hand tightened around the wrist he was holding. Weiss noticed too. He turned, irritation flashing across his face. "What is it now?" Weiss snapped in accented English. "Move along." Hale didn't. He stared down at the man in front of him, a gaunt American corporal named James Larkin from Ohio, captured during a night patrol, gone wrong. Larkin's face was grey, lips cracked and bleeding. His eyes were unfocused, staring past Hale at something only he could see. "Herr Oberleutnant," Hale said carefully, "this man is gravely ill." Weiss scoffed. "They are all ill." Hale swallowed. Daniel could see his throat move. "This is typhus." The word landed like a shell burst. The guards shifted uneasily. Typhus wasn't just another sickness. It was death on legs. Contagious. Uncontrollable. The kind of thing that tore through camps and left piles of bodies in its wake. POWs, guards, anyone unlucky enough to be close. Weiss stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You are certain?" Hale nodded once. "High fever. Rash under the arms and along the torso. Delirium. I have seen it before, in North Africa." Weiss hesitated. For the first time since Daniel had been captured, he saw fear flicker across a German officer's face. Not fear of Allied bombs or advancing armies, but fear of something that didn't care what uniform you wore. "This inspection is over," Weiss said sharply. "Return to barracks." The guards began shouting, herding the prisoners back. Larkin sagged, nearly falling. Hale caught him, earning a shove from a rifle butt that knocked the wind out of him. Daniel moved without thinking. He stepped out of line, grabbed Larkin's other arm. For a second, he expected a shot. It didn't come. They half-carried Larkin back inside. The barrack door slammed shut behind them, plunging the room into dimness and the sour stink of unwashed bodies and damp straw. Hale knelt beside Larkin, already working, already lost in the quiet urgency of his calling. Around them, men whispered. "Typhus?" Alvarez said, voice low. "That stuff wiped out a whole camp in Poland, I heard." Daniel leaned against a post, heart hammering. He looked at Hale, at the way the British medic's hands shook now that no one was watching. Something had changed. You could feel it in the air, like pressure before a storm. Outside, boots crunched in the snow. Orders were being shouted. The camp, so rigid in its routines, had been knocked off balance by one frozen moment and one word spoken out loud. Daniel didn't know what it would mean. He only knew that whatever came next would not be gentle. And for the first time since his capture, he felt something stir beneath the cold and the hunger and the fear. Hope, or maybe dread. Sometimes they felt the same. The quarantine came down fast and hard. By nightfall, Stalag 9B no longer ran on routine, but on fear. Guards marched through the snow with scarves pulled tight over their mouths. New signs went up in German and broken English. No movement between barracks. No contact. The sick were dragged out first, bundled in blankets like corpses already claimed. Larkin went quietly, delirious, whispering his mother's name, as Hale followed, arguing, pleading to be allowed to come with him. They let him. They didn't let anyone else. Daniel watched through a crack in the barrack wall as Hale disappeared into the infirmary hut, a low, sagging structure, set apart from the rest of the camp, like a moral afterthought. Smoke curled weakly from its chimney. No one came out. "Jesus," Alvarez murmured beside him. "If that stuff spreads, we're dead men walking." "No," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure why. "Hale'll stop it." Alvarez gave him a look. "You put a lot of faith in one skinny Brit." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't know Hale well, but he'd seen the way the medic moved under fire months ago in France, before they were captured. Steady, fearless, like chaos bent around him instead of through him. Men like that didn't quit. They co. The next morning, the camp woke to silence. No roll call, no work detail. Just guards posted farther apart than usual, rifles held like talismans. Snow continued to fall, covering footprints, erasing evidence of movement. The world shrank to the barracks and the waiting. Inside, the men lay, packed together, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same stale air. Hunger gnawed, cold crept, and fear spread faster than any disease. By noon, 2 more men were feverish. One was a paratrooper named Collins, who joked through his capture and never stopped smiling until his teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. The other was a British sapper who couldn't stop scratching at his skin until it bled. They called for Hale. He didn't come. Hours passed. A guard finally arrived, shouting through the door that the medic was confined to the infirmary by order of the commandant. No unnecessary exposure. Unnecessary! Alvarez snapped, slamming his fist against the wall. He's a damn doctor. Daniel stood, heart racing. They're scared, he said. They're scared of him, of us, of this whole place turning into a mass grave. That night, Collins died. No ceremony, no chaplain. Just a body wrapped in a blanket and dragged away at dawn. The men watched in silence, each of them imagining the fever creeping into their own blood, the invisible enemy crawling closer. Daniel didn't sleep. He thought of Ruth, of her letters folded and refolded in his pocket until the paper was soft as cloth. He thought of Hale, alone in the infirmary, fighting something he couldn't shoot or shout at. On the third day, the Germans made their move. They gathered the camp leaders, senior NCOs, anyone with rank, and marched them to the yard under armed guard. Daniel went with Alvarez, boots crunching in the snow, breath burning in his chest. Weiss stood before them, face pale, eyes rimmed with red. "This camp will comply with new regulations," Weiss announced. "All sick will be isolated. Any prisoner showing symptoms will report immediately. Failure to comply will be punished." A hand went up. Sergeant Miller, a grizzled tanker from Michigan. "What about medical care?" Weiss hesitated. "The British medic will continue his duties under supervision." "Supervision?" Alvarez muttered, meaning a gun to his head. Daniel's jaw tightened. That afternoon, Hale returned. He looked 10 years older. His coat hung looser on his frame. His glasses were cracked, taped together at the bridge. There was blood on his sleeve. Someone else's, Daniel hoped. When he stepped into the barracks, the room went quiet. "How many?" Hale asked. "2 dead," Alvarez said. 4 sick." Hale closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they burned with something fierce and focused. "We can stop this," he said. "But not like this. Not with them shoving men into corners and hoping it burns itself out." Daniel stepped forward. "What do you need?" Hale looked at him, really looked at him. "I need order. I need men willing to help isolate, clean, burn lice-infested bedding. And I need the Germans to listen." Alvarez snorted. "Good luck with that last part." Hale straightened. "They will. Typhus doesn't care what side you're on." They worked through the night. Men volunteered despite the risk, tearing up blankets, boiling water, scrubbing floors with frozen fingers. Daniel found himself hauling bodies, holding fevered hands, whispering nonsense to keep men anchored while Hale moved like a ghost among them, checking pulses, marking foreheads, making impossible decisions with nothing but instinct and grit. At dawn, Weiss returned. He took in the scene, the controlled chaos, the lines drawn on the floor, separating sick from well, the order imposed by men who had nothing left but discipline. "You did this without permission," Weiss said. "Yes," Hale replied, "and it worked, for now." Weiss's jaw worked. Behind him, a guard coughed and stiffened, fear flashing across his face. "What do you propose?" Weiss asked quietly. Hale didn't hesitate. "Full quarantine of affected barracks, delousing stations, adequate food and fuel, and autonomy for medical operations." Weiss stared at him, then at the men, ragged, starving, unbroken. Finally, he nodded. "It will be done," he said. "Effective immediately." As the Germans walked away, Alvarez let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. "Son of a bitch," he said softly. He did it. Daniel watched Hale sink onto a crate, exhaustion finally claiming him. For a moment the camp felt different, lighter, like it might, just might, survive the winter. But as Daniel helped Hale to his feet, a scream echoed from the far barracks, high, panicked, unmistakable. Another man had fallen sick, and the fight was far from over. The scream didn't stop. It cut through the camp like a flare shot into the night, raw, animal, terrified. Men bolted upright, guards shouted. Somewhere, a rifle went off by accident, the crack echoing against the frozen ground. Daniel was already moving before he knew he'd decided to. "Barracks 3, someone yelled. That was the pilot barracks. They reached it to find chaos. A young lieutenant named Frank Doyle was convulsing on the floor. Eyes rolled back, foam flecking his lips. His bunkmates stood frozen, helpless, fear pinning them in place. "Out!" Hale barked, shoving his way through the door. "Everyone out except volunteers!" Daniel grabbed Alvarez. "You in?" Alvarez didn't hesitate. "Always." They cleared the barracks in minutes, men stumbling into the snow, some crying, some praying, some staring blankly at nothing. Hale knelt beside Doyle, already stripping off his own coat to wrap around the pilot's shaking body. "Help me get him to isolation," Hale said. A guard blocked the door, rifle raised. "No movement!" Hale stood, eyes blazing. "If he dies here, you'll have 20 more cases by morning. Decide." The guard looked to Weiss, who had arrived breathless, scarf pulled up to his eyes. Weiss hesitated, just long enough for Hale to push past. They ran. The infirmary was overflowing now. Men lay on pallets, coughing, muttering, burning up from the inside. Hale moved among them, relentless, but Daniel could see it, the tremor in his hands, the way he leaned heavier on his cane, the sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cold. "You're sick," Daniel said quietly, as he handed Hale a cup of water. Hale shook his head. "Just tired. You've been exposed for days." Hale met his eyes. For the first time, fear flickered there, not for himself, but for what it would mean. "If I go down, you take over triage," he said. "You've got the head for it." Daniel swallowed. "I'm not a medic." "You're a soldier," Hale replied. "That's enough." That night, the camp burned its past. Lice-infested blankets were piled high and set alight, flames licking into the dark sky. The smell was foul, smoke, rot, hair, but no one complained. Men stood around the fires, faces lit orange, watching months of misery turn to ash. Then the bombing started. At first, it was distant, a low rumble like thunder, then closer. Sirens wailed outside the wire, Allied planes maybe, or German flak batteries misfiring in panic. The guards scattered, torn between duty and self-preservation. A bomb hit the far end of the camp. The ground heaved. Barracks splintered. Men were thrown like ragdolls. Daniel hit the dirt hard, ears ringing, mouth full of snow and blood. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. "Infirmary!" someone shouted. A second explosion rocked the ground, closer this time. The infirmary roof sagged, beams groaning. Hale was still inside. Daniel ran. He burst through the door to find chaos. Dust choking the air, men screaming, one wall partially collapsed. Hale lay pinned beneath a beam, glasses gone, blood running down his temple. "Doc!" Daniel dropped to his knees, hands shaking as he tried to lift the beam. It didn't budge. Hale's eyes fluttered open. He smiled faintly. "Hell of a night." "Don't talk," Daniel said. "We're getting you out." Hale coughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Listen to me." He grabbed Daniel's sleeve, grip surprisingly strong. "The Germans... They agreed to evacuate the sick if the front collapses. You have to hold them to it." Daniel shook his head. "You're not dying here." Hale's smile faded. "I've got the fever," he whispered. "I knew it this morning." Daniel froze. Another bomb fell, closer still. The beam shifted slightly. Daniel grunted, muscles screaming, and with a roar hauled it just enough for Alvarez to slide in and help. They dragged Hale free as the roof gave way behind them, sparks raining down. They staggered into the snow, collapsing in a heap as debris crashed where they'd been seconds before. Hale lay still. "Doc?" Alvarez whispered. Hale breathed, shallow, fast. They carried him to what remained of the command hut. Weiss met them there, face ashen. "He's dying," Weiss said flatly. "No," Daniel snapped. "He's not." Hale stirred, eyes focusing with effort. He looked at Weiss. "You promised." Weiss hesitated, then nodded. "The sick will be transferred at first light. Red Cross convoy." Hale closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek, freezing there. The bombing moved on. Silence crept back in, broken only by groans and the crackle of fires, burning low. By morning, the fever took Hale. He drifted in and out, muttering names of places Daniel had never seen: El Alamein, Tobruk, Dover. Men took turns sitting with him, even guards keeping their distance, but watching with something like respect. At dawn, trucks arrived. White flags, red crosses. The sick were loaded carefully, gently, like they mattered. For the first time since capture, no one was beaten, no one shouted at. As Hale was lifted onto a stretcher, his eyes opened one last time. He found Daniel's face. "See," he whispered. "Policy changed." Daniel laughed through tears. "You stubborn bastard." Hale smiled and slipped away. The trucks rolled out, carrying the sick toward uncertain survival. Snow fell softly, covering the scars of the night. The camp stood silent, changed forever by one man who had refused to look away. They buried Captain Edward Hale beyond the wire. The ground was frozen solid, iron hard, and it took 6 men and an hour with stolen tools to cut deep enough. No chaplain stood over the grave, no flag marked it. Just a circle of prisoners, hats off, breath rising in pale clouds, and one German officer who remained after the guards withdrew. Weiss stood stiffly, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the rough wooden marker Daniel had carved himself. Edward Hale, medic. Nothing else. It felt like too little. It was all they had. Alvarez cleared his throat. "He saved us," he said simply. No one argued. When the dirt finally covered the grave, Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Grief, yes, but also a strange, steady resolve. Hale hadn't just died in that camp. He'd changed it. The days that followed proved it. The quarantine held. The delousing stations stayed. Food rations increased. Not enough. Never enough. But more than before. Fuel appeared for the stoves. Guards kept their distance. The Germans were afraid now, and fear, Daniel learned, could be leveraged just as effectively as force. The Red Cross trucks came back twice more before the front shifted east, and the sound of artillery grew closer by the week. Men recovered. Some didn't. But the plague that had threatened to wipe them all out burned itself down, starved by discipline and stubborn humanity. Daniel found himself filling Hale's role in small ways, organizing rotations, keeping the sick separated, speaking up when someone tried to hide a fever out of fear. He wasn't a medic. He didn't pretend to be, but he remembered Hale's words. "You're a soldier. That's enough." In February, the camp woke to silence again, but this time it was different. No whistles, no shouted orders. Just the wind through the wire and a distant, unfamiliar rumble that grew steadily louder. Tanks. Men gathered at the fences, hearts pounding. Some laughed, some cried, some stood perfectly still, afraid to hope. By noon, American armor rolled into view, olive drab against the snow, white stars bright as miracles. The guards were gone. Weiss stood alone near the gate, pistol laid carefully on the ground. "It is over," he said. Daniel didn't answer. He walked past him, past the wire, boots crunching on free ground for the first time in months. Alvarez whooped, laughing like a madman, and others followed, pouring out of the camp like water breaking the tanino. Army medic grabbed Daniel's arm, eyes wide. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you guys?" Daniel looked back at the camp, at the barracks, the infirmary ruins, the grave beyond the wire. "We survived," he said. Weeks later, Clean and fed and wrapped in a borrowed uniform, Daniel stood on the deck of a hospital ship crossing the Atlantic. The sea stretched endless and grey, but it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a road home. He took out Ruth's last letter, unfolded it carefully. "I don't know where you are," she'd written, "but I believe you're still you. Come back to me." Daniel looked out over the water and thought of Hale, of his calm voice, his frozen moment of recognition, the courage it took to speak one word out loud and change everything. Somewhere behind him, a sailor laughed. The ship's horn sounded, long and low, cutting through the mist. Daniel folded the letter and held it to his chest. He was coming home, and he would carry the memory of a British medic buried in frozen ground far from home, whose quiet defiance had saved a camp and taught a group of broken men that even in the darkest winter of war, humanity could still draw a line and say, "No farther." The sea rolled on. The horizon waited, and for the first time since the snow fell on Stalag. 9. Be nigh. The future felt wide open.